Was it Kierkegaard or Dick Van Patten who said that good artists borrow and great artists steal? Doesn't matter. We here at the Bureau are about to steal some. The quote at the top is attributed to many people, but the one I'm going to use today is from T.S. Eliot, and what he said was that immature artists borrow and mature artists steal. And we could have a very long discussion about influence, borrowing, and stealing, how nobody really creates anything original, and that all works of art are created on the shoulder of giants. That's a long conversation for another day. But what if I told you that there was at least one genre in which stealing wasn't only encouraged, it was mandatory? Well, today we're going to look at a poetry form which has ramifications for lyrics, and that's called a cento, and that's from ancient Latin, and it means a patchwork quilt. And the reason it's called that is because a cento is a poem in which every line is made up of work from another poem. So you could have the first line from one poem and the second line from another poem, but you must attribute it all, so it's maybe technically not really stealing. But that's how you make a cento. So the way that my cento came about was actually from a fairly practical situation. I had created an album called Schism, which was spoken word poetry that I wrote and recited over ambient soundscapey type backdrops. And because I wanted to submit these to literary journals, I had to, as a prerequisite for submitting the material, sign up to receive the publications that I was submitting to. So in a very short order, I wound up with stacks and stacks of poetry and literary journals. And my solution was a twofold. One, I'm running out of space, so I'm going to reduce these down to the poems that I really, really like. And two, I might take lines from these and create a cento. When I went looking for the Flamethrower Cento, which is what it wound up being called, I thought it was pasted up in one of my notebooks like this. I'll put a picture of it. But this turned out to be a cento that I made using record reviews, which is, interesting because I have another video about how you can turn record reviews into music, and I will link that below. But I had a little bit of a memory lapse there trying to remember where I actually put this thing. I was able to find my folder because I do keep pretty meticulous archives and records, and in it were all of these pages from the literary journals which I had culled down. And here's, you can see one line is highlighted. This is a poem by Bruce Bond called Benthos, and the line is "the angel flesh that swims among the wreckage," which winds up as the first line of the Flamethrower Cento. So I went through these poems, highlighted these lines, and then I think what happened was I typed them into the computer and at random, like I pulled them randomly. Because I find here that I have a version of it which is called the random data version. Now, why would I call it that? This technique also pops up in Dadaist and Surrealist thought, specifically with Dadaist poetry, where you would take something that you wrote and cut it up and then throw like the pieces into a hat and pull them out at random. And so, you wind up getting these strange juxtapositions which use the original source material, but the randomness puts them together in a way that you wouldn't have thought. And hopefully you get something that is, more interesting than the way it was before you cut it up. This also has implications in lyrics, because in addition to the Dadaists and the Surrealists, you got people like William Burroughs, who used to use the cut-up technique to create some wild juxtapositions in his writing. And David Bowie also used to do this for his lyrics. I'm not sure if he always used original work or if he took other work and sort of cut it up and pulled it out. I do know that it reached a sort of a crescendo with him on the Outside record with Brian Eno when he had someone make him a computer program called the Verbicizer, which was capable of taking vast swaths of text and then randomly chopping them up and spitting them out. And then he would go in and edit those to taste. That's a point worth dwelling on here, because the next thing I notice about myself is that I went beyond the random data version. I decided by looking at that I would apply my own sensibilities and, created the final version of the Flamethrower Cento. And basically that was ordering it in a way that was different from the random form. And also I threw out some lines to sort of distill it down. And the very last step was to scan all of the poems in and cut out the single lines and arrange them into the digital collage that you see here. It only exists as a digital collage, and that's why I couldn't find it in my notebooks. So the next order of business was, how am I going to realize this? I mean, I could do it the way I did with my album, and I could speak it and put some sound design behind it, or maybe even some music. But in an earlier experiment, I took a poem of mine and taught an AI voice model to read it and wrote some music to go along with that. And I will link that below. So I thought I could do that again, but what if I instead sort of, score one for the humans against the machines and hire a real person with a really nice voice to do this? So I got back on Fiverr, which proved to be tremendously helpful in finding myself a cello soloist for one of my songs. I'll link that down below. And after a couple of false starts, I found this gentleman, Richard Stibbard, and decided that I would have him do the reading. The one thing that was interesting was he was very forthright, and I knew from listening to his samples that he had done mostly children's poetry, but on his portfolio, he had a very beautiful reading of Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. So I knew that he, could pull, a dark performance if necessary. So I decided to contact him, and we decided to work together. And so the next order of business was to take the poem and sort of score it. And what I mean by that is I didn't edit any of the content again as I had when I distilled it down. But what I did do was to put sort of a notation under there that I made up myself, basically to guide his narration. So, for a musician, you might have an accelerando or a crescendo or a decrescendo. I very carefully punctuated the poem and then wrote under it, this is where I would like it to speed up a little. This is where it gets more intense. Here's where it should be falling off. Between that and his amazing ability, I thought, let's give it a shot. Okay, so we're in the session, and I'm very excited to listen to what he has provided for me now for the very first time. So let's listen.
The Flamethrower Cento by Christopher Libertino. The angel flesh that swims among the wreckage, its rapids and apples, crowding the entire span of heaven, crowding the entire span of heaven.
Really good. So first impression, excellent work. And he's so good as to actually do inline alt takes on some of these lines, so giving me a choice. I could go with this. There's only one slight section towards the end where I felt like I might, have him take another pass and just give a tiny bit of direction. And it's more than likely my fault for not instructing him to kind of return to a somber thing after I had kind of given the instruction towards hope and wonder with the section on the birds. But, talk about a professional. This is really, really good. And this is the best part of collaboration, when you have something that you did and you give it to somebody else who's really, really good at something that, they've put in the 10,000 hours and they bring it all to your work and elevate it. Okay, So that was fast. We're back in the session, and I decided that I would ask the voiceover artist to do another pass at just the final lines of the poem. I feel like I could have been more explicit in terms of giving direction, and it's actually got a sort of a musical analog to when you're writing notation for someone to play back a piece of music. You know, there's telling them to do a thing, but there's also then telling them to stop do that thing. And I think that I could have been a little more explicit in saying that, you know, after we've reached sort of what might be a climax in the poem, which is the description of the birds, that after that, it's sort of like the narrator's hope has been lost, and everything from that point off is sort of just a falling away into sadness. So I very quickly retyped the poem with these directions. I will put them up, sent them back to my voiceover artist, who jumped on it immediately and just completely nailed it. He's inflected the lines a couple of different ways to give me a choice. So I will just edit together the takes as I would a vocal performance. Fantastic. I'm overjoyed. The next order of business was to think about what I wanted to accompany the reading. And I thought I could, you know, write some music to go with it, like I did for the one that was inspired by Max Richter and that the AI read. Or I could do some sound design, soundscapes, like I did on Schism. But I was really enamored of Richard's reading, and I think the text stands by itself. I didn't want to detract from it. His performance is subtle, and I didn't want to put anything on top of it per se. But I did want to make a video for it. YouTube being the way that I generally share my work with the online world. So I wanted to make something that was sort of abstract and subtle, like the reading and the poem, which would have recognizable elements, but not detract from the overall experience of hearing the words. So I did something that it touches on the idea of collage. I layered several images, some moving, some still, usually 3, but at some points I think maybe only 2. And when I was doing this, I thought of many things. One was the collages that I make out of paper, except these are collages that I make out of light and moving forms, which I actually prefer. It reminded me also of ambient paintings, which is a thing that I do, which is very similar to what you're going to see here. But I have created a painting that, you know, sits in a corner quietly making sounds and changing. It's a painting, but it's not really a painting. I'll cover that in another video at some point. And while I was working on it, I also remembered reading about how Peter Greenaway went about doing a lot of digital compositing and layering when he did the Pillow Book. He was in mind as I was sort of layering these watery images and, you know, sort of somewhat abstract natural forms, but you get some really beautiful, to me, juxtapositions that points the way towards further work. So without further ado, here is the Flamethrower Cento in its entirety as read by Richard Stibbard.
The Flamethrower Cento by Christopher Libertino. The angel flesh that swims among the wreckage, its rapids and apples, crowding the entire span of heaven, the bound and the radial crown, paint on an upturned skiff, one ruin shining on another in the garden she can't leave. Come, night, come sleep, come fog, wreathed in feather and sift. All of our effort was to reach the sound before the darkness came. Too far at sea, facing the violent winds, never land, never once again to shore. One hand holding what the other forgets. Strange how alive the mind at night, shaping the shadows, sharpening them to silhouettes. There are no ghosts anymore, even in dreams. If I speak the correct order of extracted words, this animation of so many brittle tones. 1,000 in the meadow beyond, where a dropped plum incandesces to a star. Now the crow calls from elsewhere, and raven in a million colours, and every night a church full of wild canaries. Not a soul to be seen. No candle burning at either end of the long corridor. Checkered moonlight through the lattice, like a lamp turned off in a house on the hill. The core of us is strange. You leave me, and you leave to where I cannot follow.
This time, I always like to ask myself a couple of questions, and the first one is, was the experiment a success? Unlike other experiments in this series, this is sort of a forensic post-mortem of something I did years ago. I actually don't have dates on the Word files printed out, but I will check my computer and see, exactly when I did this. But I engaged in it, as a way of making space and reducing down my poetry collection, and also trying my hand at a form that I had never done before. I do like the poem very much, so in that sense, it's a success. Did I learn anything? And again, the answer is yes. So I very much respond to the concept of cutting things up and seeing what kinds of juxtapositions you can get with, introducing randomness and a little bit of chaos into the proceedings. It reminds me of how important the Dadists and Surrealists were, and also the Futurists. That was a class I took when I was at school and wound up being one of my all-time favorites, along with oniric cinema, which is portrayal of dreams or altered states of consciousness in films. I think you could argue that the video that I made to go along with the Flamethrower Cento, draws heavily on the idea of oniric cinema. It's very kind of dreamy imagery there. Maybe some hint of Maya Deren, perhaps. So I learned that. The next thing was also, again, about collaboration, which is something that I'm, very strenuously working on in terms of, opening up my process so that I work, with other people. And it was nice to work with somebody that I hadn't worked with before. He stepped outside of his comfort zone a little bit, and I think he's happy to do that. So I really am getting, into the idea of working with more people. It's still all sort of virtual, sending off track or sending off, written instructions and getting stuff back. But there's a kind of beauty in that too. Like I said, when the files come in, it's sort of like, a little bit like opening your presents on Christmas Day. It's like, you don't know, there's a little bit of nervousness because you're hoping, or at least I'm hoping that, it's working well and that I'm not going to have to say, oh, well, that really didn't work out. That's a thing that I'm trying to get over. But in this case, there was none of that. It was almost perfect out of the box. And then Richard was all too kind to hone his performance for the end. And I'm extraordinarily grateful and very happy with the way it turned out. A lot of times I find out with the experiments I run on this channel that the best method for me is to, run the experiment and it kicks out the stuff. But after the fact, go in there and apply yourself and your skills and your knowledge and your sensibilities towards pulling the stuff that really appeals. I mean, if you could make it better than a random output, I think make it better. I would say that the last thing that I learned is just how much I love doing these digital composite layered collages. While I was working on this, I came across some other ideas that weren't right for this, but I filed that away because, they were really gorgeous, and, could come into play in a video where that would be more appropriate down the line. So I hope you enjoyed the Flamethrower Cento. Please like and subscribe. It does help the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.